A couple of years ago, a lady I know asked me if I could make a wine rack out of an old pallet. She said she wanted it to look kind of, countrified or rustic. So I did. I grabbed an old pallet, turned it into a wine rack. She liked it, and I guess her daughter did too. So her daughter's birthday's coming up, and she asked me, "Say, Dave, can you make another one for my daughter?" So I did. Well, here it is. Building this wine rack is pretty straightforward, as you can see. It doesn't require a lot of technical woodworking skill. It's really a pretty good beginner project if you just wanted to try to make something and get into woodworking a little bit. But anyway, not a lot to talk about on this making this wine rack. So I thought instead I'd just fill in with a little story. Now, some of you who've been with me for a while will remember this story. I think I told it about 2 years ago, but for the rest of you, it'll let you know just how much I know about wine, especially if you start talking about them there fine wines.
Back in about, 1978, maybe it was closer to 1980, I started doing business travel. Made a few trips, and finally I made one to a big city. First big city I went to was Atlanta. Whole different place than here in the Ozarks. I got off the plane, plant manager met me. As we're driving away, he says, "Shall we get a bite to eat?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm really hungry. Let's do that." So he says, "Where you want to eat?" I didn't know anything about Atlanta. But I was looking right ahead, and there was a tower with a ball up on top of it. And I said, "Boy, that's a fancy place." He said, "Yeah, they have a restaurant too. You want to eat there?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to go up there." He said, "Well, that ball on top rotates." And I got to watching it. And sure enough, that ball up on top was turning. So it started me to thinking, how does that work anyway? I mean, I could figure out how you do the electricity and maybe the phones, put a couple little copper strips in, and you got some contactors that follow along as it spins and transmits the electricity, but how are you going to do the sewer and the water? I mean, there's only one middle to that ball, and I couldn't figure out how to get those pipes to swivel and bend around each other. So we went inside, and as I passed through the door, it was pretty apparent to me how that worked. You see, only the lights were outside of the ball, or out in the part that turned. The torus, the donut, that turned around the center of the tower. Everything else was in the middle of the tower, so the mystery wasn't that big. But at any rate, they set us at our table. We're sitting there and we're talking about whether or not we want what we want to eat. Plant manager says, "Bring us a couple drinks. What you drinking?" I told him. So, looking outside at all the sights and the lights passing by and how busy the city was, I knew I wasn't in the Ozarks anymore. But my attention was distracted by this beautiful woman. Sat down at the table next to us, and a guy. She was wearing some kind of a formal dress. He was dressed up in a really expensive suit. Could have passed as a tuxedo where I came from. I mean, you know, formal clothes where I come from is a pair of new denim jeans and spit polished cowboy boots. Anyway, they sat down there, and it wasn't long till this wine steward dude came walking up there. Had this little napkin on his arm and had a wine list laying on it. Walked up to him and he said, "Are we having wine tonight?" And the gentleman looks over at him and said, "Well, we may." So then the wine steward started in his list of recommendations. What he would have, what they would have if they had the tilapia, and what would be best if they had the steak, and what was best. You know, he went through this whole list of stuff, naming the wines I'd never even heard of before, you know. And he said, "Would you like a moment to choose?" And the guy shook his head yes. He handed him the wine list and he walked off. So I'm sitting there thinking, you know, I've never seen how high society people pick wines. I've never even heard them talk about wines. This ought to be interesting. Finally, the couple decides what they want. He folds up the wine list, and as soon as it touches the table, the wine steward starts his well-practiced walk back over to the table with his little napkin on his arm. You know. And he says, "Have we made a choice?" And the man looks at him and he says, "We have." The wine steward picks up the wine list, smiles, and says, "What will we be having?" The guy looks him right in the eye, says, "We'll be having some of that there red wine." The wine steward puts his wine list on his arm with a grimace and says, "Yes, yes, of course," and walks back over to the center of the Taurus. And I'm sitting there and I almost spew my drink as I realize that high society people order wine the same way we do here in the Ozarks.
Not too long ago, I went out to this high-class, fancy schmancy eating place, and sitting there at the table, and the lady comes up there, and she's got this bottle of wine, and looks to me like one of them is a clear wine, which she said was a white wine, and the other one was kind of a red-looking wine. But anyway, she says, "Would you like to try some wine?" And I said, "Well, I don't believe I do." But some of the other folks there at the table, they said, yeah, they'd like to have a little shot. So she uncorks the bottle, and she takes it over and pours a little glass and hands it to one of the fellas that was there with me. And he took a good sniff of it and said, "Yeah, it's pretty good." I suspect it smelled just like wine, but I don't know. I don't have an educated palate, and my nose, it just, I can't tell one wine from another. But anyway, she went ahead and served on that side of the table. She got around to me and she said, "Would you like to have a drink of this wine?" And I said, "No, ma'am, I don't think I would." She says, "Well, I'll be back in a little bit." And she set the bottle right there in front of me. And I got to looking around, and over there to the side, beside where we were eating, was a little place that had just several bottles of wine lined up in there, and there was a little basket, nice little basket, and it was sitting there right by the bottles, and it was just full of them corks out of them wine bottles. So when she came back over, she grabbed that wine bottle, picked it up, and looked at me and said, "Are you sure you don't want any wine?" I said, "No, ma'am. But I'll tell you what are you going to do with all them corks over there in that bowl?" And she looked over there and she says, "Well, we just gather them up and we throw them out at the end of the night." And I said, "Well, ma'am, I tell you what would it take me to buy them corks off you?" She says, "Nothing. We'll give them to you." And I said, "Well, I tell you what, why don't you just put them in a takeout box and I'll make that my take home tonight." And there it was. I figured I'd have some use for them one of these days. And I got to tell you, that was probably the very best thing that came out of that trip over at that high-class restaurant. And, I might go back. I never did really have much of a hankering to eat at them fancy schmancy restaurants. But I got to tell you, the Red Lobster, it's right up there with the best of them. Just for the record, I had just one bottle of wine. That's all I got. It was a blackberry wine from a local vineyard here, and I hear it's pretty good. They said it was pretty good. They talked me into buying it anyway. So I did have one bottle, and I've been keeping it around just in case I made another one of them wine racks, and that's what I'm using to test it with here. But to sum this up, this project was pretty simple, went pretty quick. I'd say probably 4 hours in it, maybe. Split up between 2 different days. And I think it turned out okay. I think it's what she wanted. I sent her a picture of it, and she said it looked pretty good. So she'll be giving it to her daughter here in a few days. But to wrap this up, I took the camera and I did a little flyby so you can see what the details are of it. Appreciate you hanging with me, and for those of you who've already heard my stories, I apologize for making you sit through them again, but for the rest of you, I really do want to thank you for hanging with me and hope you have nothing less than a wonderful day.